Picture this, $200,000, my entire retirement, my blood, sweat, and literal tears, dissolving into black ash and floating across the Nebraska sky. I stood there, boots sinking into the mud, watching the smoke choke out the sunset over what should have been 40 acres of premium hard red winter wheat, just 3 days away from harvest, now looking like a scorched battlefield from a war nobody declared. The smell of a dying farm is something you never forget. It's a sickly sweet mixture of roasted grain, diesel fumes, and pure, unadulterated malice that sticks to the back of your throat. But here is the part that made my hands shake, not with fear, but with a cold, jagged rage that I hadn't felt in years, because 50 feet away, standing on her manicured Kentucky bluegrass, was Corinna Vance. She was holding a garden hose, supposedly helping the volunteer firefighters, but I watched her lovingly water her prize-winning hydrangeas, ensuring every precious drop saved her flowers while not a single drop was aimed at the flames devouring my future. She actually looked up, locked eyes with me through the haze of smoke, smoothed her pristine white blouse, and called out with a smile that was sharp enough to cut glass. "So sorry about your little crop problem, neighbor." A little crop problem, she called it, after 2 years of systematic harassment, legal warfare, and psychological torture. But what Corinna didn't know, what she was too arrogant to realize, was that I wasn't just a dirt-poor farmer she could bully into bankruptcy. My name is Judge Silas Thorne, and on Monday morning, this arsonist wasn't going to see a neighbor, she was going to face me across my courtroom as a defendant. Let's rewind the tape, because to understand the fire, you have to understand the slow-motion train wreck that led us here. I live a double life. Weekdays I'm in a black robe presiding over the district court in Oak Haven, Nebraska, deciding the fates of land disputes and criminal cases. But on weekends, I am knee-deep in soil, carrying the torch my grandfather lit back in 1952. This 200-acre ranch wasn't just property. It was therapy. It was the only thing that kept me breathing after Eleanor passed away 2 years ago from ovarian cancer. Eleanor always said the wheat fields were holy ground, and after 12 hours of listening to people lie to my face in court, there was something spiritual about the silence of the farm, the crunch of gravel, the smell of rain on dust. It was the only place I didn't feel alone. Then came the developers, swarming like locusts, carving up the rolling hills into Willow Creek Heights, dropping 47 cookie-cutter McMansions right onto the edge of my property line. Most of the new folks were fine, just people escaping the city sprawl, looking for a slice of the quiet life. But every paradise has a serpent, and ours drove a pristine white G-Wagon and answered to the name Corinna Vance. She was a 50-something transplant from endless money, with hair sprayed into an unmoving helmet of blonde ambition and a belief that the world existed solely to cater to her aesthetic preferences. Within 6 months, she had clawed her way to the presidency of the Willow Creek Association, promising to elevate property values, which was just code for erasing my farm from the map. The attacks started small, like paper cuts, complaints about my rooster, noise violations for my tractor, hysterical emails about dust clouds threatening the respiratory health of children who lived inside air-conditioned houses all day. I tried to be the good guy. I really did. I brought over baskets of sweet corn. I explained the agricultural cycles. I even offered to shut down the heavy machinery during her garden parties. But she just took the corn with 2 fingers like it was radioactive waste and filed 3 more complaints the next day. It was a methodical escalation, like a siege. She petitioned for 12-foot screening walls, tried to enforce noise ordinances on equipment that had been running since before she was born, and sent certified letters from lawyers paid for by the HOA dues. But Corinna's biggest mistake was thinking she was smarter than the history of the land, because my grandfather was a fox, and when he sold the easement rights back in the 70s, he locked in permanent, irrevocable agricultural access through what was now her subdivision. When her lawyers couldn't break the easement, she went rogue, and I'll never forget the Tuesday morning I hooked up the combine and found my access road blocked by massive, decorative boulders, the kind that cost $5,000 apiece and matched her patio perfectly. I called the sheriff, but she produced a forged work order claiming they were traffic safety enhancements, and without video proof, the sheriff, a good man named Deputy Miller, just shrugged and said his hands were tied. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a property dispute. This was war, total warfare against my family's legacy, against Eleanor's memory, and she thought her money made her untouchable. But she had no idea she was poking a bear who knew the penal code better than she knew her own wine list. 2 months before harvest, the chemical warfare began. I woke up to find a 3-acre strip of my wheat, right along her fence line. Dead, not golden ripe, but a sickly, twisted brown, smelling like chemical death. Corinna had hired a landscaping crew to do invasive weed management on a day with 25-mile-per-hour winds blowing directly onto my crop, wiping out $12,000 of product in an hour. I called my insurance adjuster, a guy who's seen it all, and he confirmed it was herbicide drift, textbook negligence. But proving intent is the hard part. But here is where being a judge comes in handy. I know that evidence is king, so I spent the weekend installing military-grade trail cameras along the perimeter, 4K resolution, night vision, the works. It didn't take long. 2 weeks later, I was reviewing footage, and there she was, standing like a general on her patio, pointing at the fence line. I could hear her voice crystal clear on the audio, telling the contractor, "I don't care about the wind, just spray it. Those weeds are an eyesore." The contractor tried to warn her about the drift, and she cut him off, saying, "I pay you to spray, not to give me a weather report." I burned that footage onto 3 separate hard drives and locked them in my office safe. Because in the legal world, you don't fire your gun the moment you see the target. You wait until they walk into the trap. The chemical attack backfired on her in the community, though, because other residents started whispering, approaching me with their own horror stories. Mrs. Gable, a retired librarian with a beautiful butterfly garden, showed me stacks of fines for unauthorized vegetation. And Mr. Henderson was being fined hundreds of dollars for parking his work truck in his own driveway. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for my wheat. I was the reluctant rebellion leader against a petty tyrant who was using the Willow Creek Association as her personal weapon. Sensing she was losing the crowd, Corinna went nuclear, sending me a cease and desist from a fancy firm in the city, demanding a $40,000 environmental impact study that would freeze my operations for 6 months, effectively killing the harvest. It was a classic intimidation tactic, bury the little guy in paperwork until he suffocates. But she had crossed a line from civil annoyance into criminal territory, specifically Kansas statutes regarding agricultural interference. I stayed silent, letting her think I was intimidated, letting her confidence bloat like a tick, because I knew the harvest was coming, and with it, the final showdown. 3 weeks later, Corinna pulled a maneuver so audacious I almost admired the sheer villainy of it, weaponizing the Willow Creek Association to pass a mandatory machinery curfew, banning any equipment noise before 9 a.m. or after 5 p.m. Anyone who knows farming knows that harvest is a war against moisture. You start when the dew burns off, and you don't stop until the humidity rises, meaning a 9 to 5 schedule would guarantee my crop rotted in the field. She called an emergency HOA meeting at the clubhouse to ratify this insanity, flying in some bogus acoustic expert to testify about decibel levels, confident that she was about to hammer the final nail in my coffin. I worked late that Thursday, purposefully keeping my judicial robes on as I drove to the clubhouse, the black polyester stifling in the summer heat, but necessary for the theatricality of the moment. I walked in just as Corinna was preaching to the choir, her voice shrill with manufactured outrage, claiming my tractor was a public health crisis. The room went silent when I entered, 43 heads snapping toward the back where a sitting judge had just materialized, the fluorescent lights humming over the tension. "Don't mind me," I said, voice low and smooth. "Just a concerned property owner." She tried to recover, putting on her fake smile, but I let her expert ramble for 20 minutes before I stood up and dropped the hammer, asking him if he was familiar with the Right to Farm Act. When he stuttered, I pulled out my phone and read the statute aloud, explaining that my farm, having operated continuously for 71 years, was immune to nuisance suits, and that any local ordinance attempting to restrict normal agricultural operations was not only void but illegal. Then I looked directly at Corinna and dropped the bomb. Interfering with a lawful harvest carries criminal penalties, and I'd hate to see my neighbors liable for damages. The room turned on her instantly, families walking out, the curfew dying on the floor, and as I left, I heard her hissing into her phone. "The legal route failed. We need to get personal." She wasn't kidding. The following week was a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as public safety. It started at dawn on a Tuesday with a SWAT-level response to my farm, fire trucks, hazmat units, ambulances screaming down my driveway because someone reported a meth lab and toxic burning. My old football buddy, Chief Miller, hopped out of the truck, took one look at my coffee cup, and shook his head, apologizing for the waste of taxpayer money, but they had to check. We walked the property. My chemical storage was cleaner than a hospital operating room. But there was Corinna, sipping a mimosa in her window, watching the circus she'd ordered. It didn't stop there. She called the health inspector, the EPA, the state AG board. 6 emergency calls in 2 weeks, every single one bogus, every single one eating up precious harvest prep time. But she was sloppy, her arrogance making her reckless, because false reporting of an emergency is a felony, and she was racking up counts like she was collecting frequent flyer miles. I sat in my kitchen, drinking the cheap Merlot Eleanor used to love, watching the security footage of her dialing the phone, building a case file that was thicker than a phone book. Then came the Friday night before harvest. The weather forecast was perfect, the wheat was dry, and Corinna played her ace, a town hall with Commissioner Harlan, trying to demand an emergency injunction. She screamed about agricultural terrorism, accusing me of poisoning the groundwater, but Commissioner Harlan, an old-school politician who didn't suffer fools, shut her down cold, asking if she was formally accusing a judge of federal crimes without evidence. She unraveled, screaming that the inspectors were blind, and that's when I knew she was desperate, dangerously desperate. Saturday night, 2 days before the combines were set to roll, my foreman Carlos radioed me, voice tight. "Boss, Southfield, bring the camera, stay low." I crept through the wheat, the stalks rustling against my jeans, and there she was, Corinna Vance, dressed in black athleisure wear, dragging gas-soaked hay bales toward my driest patch of crop, accompanied by a man I later learned was Brad, her ex-husband. They were setting up an accelerant perimeter, clear as day, attempting to torch the field before I could harvest. I filmed it all, the glint of the moonlight on the gas cans, her whispered commands, but they spooked and ran before the deputies could arrive, leaving behind the gas cans covered in fingerprints. Sunday was a blur of preparation. I dug into her background and found out this wasn't her first rodeo. She was a professional predator who had destroyed vineyards in California and farms in Oregon using the same playbook. I organized a war room on my kitchen table, evidence bags, financial records, witness statements from her past victims, everything ready for the federal prosecutors. Carlos and his son stood guard with the local veterans group, turning my farm into a fortress, while Elena Rossi, the county extension agent, brought over soil samples proving my farm was actually improving the local ecology. We knew she would try again. Desperation makes people stupid, and Corinna was terrifyingly stupid. The harvest was set to begin Monday, which meant Sunday night was her last chance to destroy me. Carlos found me on the porch at midnight, looking at the monitors. "She doesn't know about the court docket tomorrow, does she?" he asked. I smiled, a cold, hard smile. "No, Carlos. She thinks she's walking into a civil hearing for a fence dispute. She has no idea she's the star of her own criminal prosecution." Monday arrived with a sky so blue it looked painted, but the real storm was brewing inside the county courthouse. The night before, Corinna had made her final, fatal error. At 4 a.m., my security system lit up like a Christmas tree. She and Brad had returned, not to the fields this time, but to my main storage shed, the one holding 80% of my harvested grain, nearly $200,000 of hard red winter wheat. They had industrial timers and accelerants, trying to stage an electrical fire, but they were too late. Deputy Miller was waiting in the shadows. He didn't arrest them immediately, though. He let them cut the wire, let them pour the gas, ensuring the charge wouldn't just be trespassing, but attempted arson and agricultural terrorism. They fled into the night thinking they'd gotten away with it, not knowing Miller had it all on body cam, waiting to execute the warrant in the most public way possible. The shed took damage, flames licking up the side before the volunteers killed it, destroying about 50 grand worth of wheat. A painful loss, but the trap was sprung. The kicker? Corinna had filed an insurance claim for smoke damage to her house 2 hours before the fire actually started, A timestamp error that proved premeditation so clearly it made the insurance investigators laugh out loud. So there we were, 9 a.m. The courtroom was packed, standing room only, filled with farmers, neighbors, and federal agents quietly sitting in the back row. Corinna walked in like she owned the place, wearing a powder blue suit that cost more than my truck, flanked by her slick city lawyer, Attorney Sterling. They thought they were there to bully a rural judge into moving a fence line. She looked at me on the bench, and for a split second, I saw confusion flicker in her eyes. But she swallowed it, convinced her money was a shield nothing could penetrate. I went through the motions. Does the plaintiff have any objection to this court hearing the matter given the proximity of our properties? Sterling, arrogant to the bone, waved the conflict of interest, eager to crush me. He put Corinna on the stand, and she began to perjure herself with breathtaking confidence, testifying about how she had to take matters into her own hands to protect the neighborhood from agricultural threats. She was literally confessing to the intent behind her crimes. Then, the door swung open. Deputy Miller walked in, not alone, but with 2 federal agents. "Your Honor," he said, his voice booming off the mahogany walls, "we have federal warrants for Corinna Vance." The charges rang out like gunshots. Agricultural terrorism, first-degree arson, mail fraud, interstate conspiracy. The color drained from her face so fast, she looked like a corpse. She stood up, screaming, "This is a setup. This corrupt judge is the terrorist," screaming at the FBI agents, calling them conspirators, digging her grave deeper with every hysterical word. As they cuffed her, she looked at me, really looked at me for the first time, and saw not the farmer she hated, but the judge she had foolishly tried to burn. The gavel came down, and the sound was the sweetest music I'd ever heard. 6 months later, the federal court didn't blink. Corinna got 18 months in federal prison, followed by a mountain of restitution that liquidated her assets. Her white BMW, her perfectly decorated house, all sold to pay for the wheat she burned. But the real victory wasn't her downfall. It was what rose from the ashes. I used the settlement money to start the Eleanor Thorne Agricultural Defense Fund, a legal war chest for farmers fighting HOAs. We've already saved family farms in 3 states. Willow Creek Heights dissolved the HOA, and you know what? Property values went up. Families started planting gardens, kids played outside, and the fear was gone. As for me, I found something in the ashes too. Elena, the extension agent who stood by me, she and I stood in that same wheat field a year later, not watching it burn, but saying our vows. The scar on the land healed. The wheat grew back thicker than before, proving that sometimes you have to burn out the rot to let the good things grow. So here's the question I want to leave you with, and I want you to really think about it in the comments. We talk about property rights, but where does one person's comfort end and another person's livelihood begin? Was I right to let her walk into that trap, to let her light that match just to ensure she went away for good? Or did I manipulate the system just as much as she tried to? Justice was served, but was it vengeance? Let me know what you think. Hit that like button if you believe in standing your ground, and subscribe for the next story, because trust me, the war for the countryside is far from over.